Well, good morning, friends. This morning we're looking at 1 Samuel 17. And this is a bit of a lesson in context here. We're going to see how looking at the context of a passage, we can understand it better. Now, 1 Samuel 17 is the story of Goliath. Story of David's conquering of Goliath. Really the failure of Saul to be the leader or champion of Israel. And how David was anointed king privately, but he is the champion of Israel. And he shows that by conquering Goliath. So, really the first question I think that we need to ask is, how tall was Goliath? Now, if you look in your Masoretic text, so I've got it here. This is the BHS, Samuel. Masoretic text, or what most of our Old Testament is translated directly from. Goliath is listed in here as 6 cubits in a span, which is approximately 9'9", 9.5 feet, somewhere in that range, which is a really tall person, definitely a giant. When you consider that we don't really have a record of any humans in the modern era that are that tall. It's very tall. But, the Bible does talk about giants, giant clans, and, in antiquity, it's not unusual to hear about giant kings and whatnot. So, it is possible that Goliath could have been 6 cubits in a span, but if we look at the Septuagint, so this guy here, which is our Old Testament, translated into Greek in the 2nd century before Christ. Greek has him at 4 cubits in a span, which is 6'9", they're about 6'9", so that's more of a reasonable height for a tall person. I know some people that are 6'9". Still a giant, but more realistic size giant. And also we have one of the Dead Sea Scrolls has 4 cubits in a span as well. So Dead Sea Scrolls were copied and stored, before Christ as well. Some of those go back to 2nd century, around the same time as the Septuagint translation. So, very old witnesses to a 4 cubit span height for Goliath. So, I think that the context here would suggest that Goliath is probably 4 cubits in a span. Because when you read, you'll see that he is wearing armor and he has weapons that are big but not huge, right? David is able to wield Goliath's sword in battle. And the text says that he's wearing about 125 pounds of scale armor. So it's about 25% more than these guys would normally wear, which is, if he was 6'9", would make sense. If he was 9'9" or 9'6", he would be considerably bigger. he could handle a lot more than that. That's just, just one example. We know Saul is actually a head taller than most Israelites. So Saul's probably over 6 foot tall. Saul would have been a better match for Goliath than David. If David is an average Hebrew size at that time, he could be as short as 5 foot tall. And I think another thing to consider is the age of David, right? So the Bible says, the text says that he was a na'ar, which just means unmarried man. Gets translated boy, but it could be translated just unmarried man. So a na'ar, you could be a na'ar at 40 years old. But David's probably not 40, he's probably less than 20, because he's not in this battle. You had to be 20 to be in the army of Israel. So I'd say David is less than 20. But I would say that he's full grown. He's not a kid. He's a shepherd able to kill animals, big animals. And we also need to consider what he's using here. So what is a sling? What is a stone? What is a sling stone? A sling stone is a very formidable weapon. It's not a small little slingshot like we have here in the U.S. It's nothing like that. It's a huge artillery weapon that they would use in the ancient world to hurl stones up into cities, over walls. They would use them to take down horses and animals in battle. They were used to crush animals' legs, people's legs. They would bowl with them, basically. And we have plenty of sling stones that we found in cities. They're big. They're about the size of a pool cue, baseball. Some of them bigger, some of them smaller. Could be golf ball size, but very large, very large. So anyway, the other issue we need to look at is where is Goliath hit with this sling stone. If I hit you in the head with a baseball at over 100 miles an hour, you would probably die, and you would probably fall back. But Goliath doesn't die, and Goliath doesn't fall back, right? So it says here in verse 49, David put his hand in his bag, took a stone and slung it, struck the Philistine on his forehead. And the stone sank into his forehead so that he fell on his face to the ground. Then it says that David ran, stood over the Philistine, took his sword, drew it out of its sheath, and killed him, cut off his head. When the Philistines saw their champion was dead, they fled. So, I'm going to suggest to you that David did not hit Goliath in his forehead. He hit Goliath in his frontal. And what is Goliath wearing on his legs? He also had bronze greaves on his legs. So if you look at your Hebrew, this literally says frontals of bronze. It's the same word. It's just a plural. And then when you look here, it just says he got hit in the frontal. So context here leads us to believe that the picture that we've been sold is probably not accurate. What went wrong here? Why did this translation become so dominant throughout antiquity? Well, the Septuagint has added to the text here. It says that Then he strikes the Philistine in the forehead through the helmet, gets added. And that's long ago. So in antiquity, the Septuagint is giving us this translation by adding to the text, giving us this image of Goliath's head getting crushed as the stone sinks in to the frontal. And trust me, if you got hit in the head with a stone and it sunk into your head, you would die instantly. But Goliath is not dead. So there's a few other issues with this chapter that we want to look at. The text says that David puts the sword of Goliath, and it says right here in verse 54 that David took the Philistine's head, brought it to Jerusalem. That's weird. But he put his weapons in his tent. So we know that the weapons are not in David's personal tent, but they're in his, should be capital H, or David's tent, meaning David's, God's tent, the tabernacle, which is where we find the sword later. So the reason the sword is in the tent of Yahweh is because this is a champion ordeal, and God is fighting for Israel. David is a vessel, and the nature of this battle is single combat, champion ordeal. So many times in battle they weren't just going to kill each other. Sometimes they would use champions to fight, and then they would submit to that. They would see that as God choosing who the victor was, and they would be submissive to the outcome. The Philistines don't go along with that plan, but that's the plan. They run and flee, but that's what they agree to. Now David takes the head and brings it to Jerusalem. Why would he do that? Well, I'm going to suggest that David is not a little boy here. He's a man. David has plans. David knows that he's been anointed king of Israel. And David has plans to bring the throne of God to Mount Moriah, which is where Abraham offered Isaac, or attempted to. And this is a sacred spot, and David plans to bring the throne of God to that very location and build the temple there. And so he puts the people of Jerusalem on notice by bringing a head to their gates. And he's letting them know that I'm coming for this city. So David is making a declaration of war and letting them know, he's putting them on notice that he is coming for this city. And he does eventually come for that city. And he makes it his city, the city of David, because he is the champion of Israel. And one last thing we can talk about, a little bit of biblical theology, is that we see in the book of Daniel an image, a statue that's made of gold, silver, bronze, clay, iron. And then it says that a stone not cut from human hands comes out and strikes this statue on the foot or in the leg. In the ancient world, the foot was from the knee down. And then the stone, is like an apocalyptic vision here. The stone rises up and crushes this anti-God statue. I believe that image kind of it reflects this battle actually here. and shows us how. Anyway, that's some thoughts for the day for 1 Samuel 17. It's a bit longer than I would normally do for a morning devotion, but I hope you find it helpful. If you'd like to study this a bit more, I'll link some things for you. By the way, this is not a new concept or something that I discovered. This has been in print for over 50 years. Scholars know well about it. Where biblical commentaries had references to articles on it for many, many years. So nothing new, just maybe new to you. Have a great day. I'll see you next time.